Across humanity, stories witness us, and through them we see, we hear, and we grow. I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Peter Rizzi, and this is Book Feels, a podcast about how books made us feel and how we feel about books. The Secret Garden is a children's novel first published in 1911 by Frances Hodgson Burnett. It follows 10-year-old Mary Lennox, who grows up spoiled but largely neglected by her parents in British colonial India. She is suddenly orphaned when they die in a cholera outbreak and is sent to England to live with her uncle, Archibald Craven. At first, Mary is angry and unpleasant, but soon starts to become curious about her new mysterious home, which includes a secret locked garden and a hidden child, her cousin Colin Craven. Mary grows into a kind, spirited young girl, and she befriends animals, Dickon, the good-natured Yorkshire brother of her maid Martha, and Ben Weatherstaff, a surly but kind gardener. As spring blooms in the secret garden, we watch Mary, Colin, and Mr. Craven come back to life as well. Pauline, this book was one of your choices, and it was a favorite of yours. Do you want to talk about what this book means to you, how you first discovered it?
Yeah, I love this book. I read it first when I was, I think, in first grade. I can't remember if it was required reading or not. I'm pretty sure it was, but I loved it and read it over and over and over again. Like every year, multiple times a year, I would read it when I was a kid. And even when I was older in high school, I would still read it. So I don't even know how many times I've read this book. It really means a lot to me. I don't know. I think, I grew up as such a lonely child, and Mary, the main character, is really lonely and neglected. And for her to inhabit kind of this magical world with a secret garden that was hers and that brought her back to life and that brought healing to her life in general, and she came out happy in the end of it. It's a very it was such an enchanting idea for me as a young child in a similarly neglectful home. And I wanted to so desperately to escape into worlds like Mary's.
I can so see why it was so meaningful for you.
Yeah. I think also just little girl culture. So, Peter, I think something that I want to talk about first, because this book was so formative to me, and I think to many others, is just what it teaches us as children and what it teaches little girls in particular. I definitely read it young, and I read it many, many times as a child, and I absorbed a lot of its messaging. And a lot of it was good, and some of it didn't age particularly well.
The good and the bad.
Yeah, which I think is just society raising you. Like, that's what happens when you're raised by anybody, including by books. So one of the things I want to talk about first is kind of this focus on the physical appearance of Mary, the main character. She is described as kind of ugly. That's like her first trait that she's described with. And it really stuck with me this time around reading it. I think you have a quote. Do you want to read that?
I do. So this is very early on in the book. Mary's mother and father have just died, and before she's to go to Britain to live with her uncle, she is taken in by someone else in the British community in India. And this is what this woman, Mrs. Crawford, has to say about Mary. She is such a plain child, and her mother was such a pretty creature. She had a very pretty manner, too, and Mary has the most unattractive ways I ever saw in a child. The children call her Mistress Mary quite contrary, and though it's naughty of them, one can't help understanding it. Perhaps if her mother had carried her pretty face and her pretty manners oftener into the nursery, Mary might have learned some pretty ways, too. It is very sad, now the poor beautiful thing is gone, to remember that many people never even knew that she had a child at all.
Ugh, that's heartbreaking.
There's some poignancy here in that Mrs. Crawford is acknowledging that Mary's mother sort of abandoned her.
Yeah.
Never stepped foot in the nursery to care for Mary, which is true. This is an early theme of the book, is that Mary is raised entirely by her ayah, and who is an Indian woman who
is a servant, basically.
Is a servant, yes. And Mary has multiple servants, and she sort of watches her mother from afar. Her mother is never involved in her life. It's very sad. And the poignancy is in that Mrs. Crawford points that out. However, there's this emphasis, like you said, on physical appearance, on prettiness, as that Mary not being pretty means there's inherently something wrong and kind of like disgusting about her is how they
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah, and I think that something that the book emphasizes over and over again is that Mary has, like, kind of yellow skin because she, doesn't play well and doesn't eat well, and that she has, like, limp straw-like hair, and,
It's
like
like sickly
yeah, like,
almost.
she looks sickly, she's really thin, and she looks really sour all the time, and then towards the end of the book, after she's, um, sort of come back to life and found something she loves, like, she finds this garden that she loves, she makes friends, she finds people she likes, she learns to like people, they learn to like her. She becomes prettier, and people comment on her appearance that she's pretty, and I don't think that that sends a great message that, like, like, happiness and health is sort of equated with prettiness or with beauty. Um, I think that there could be something to be said about, if you're happy, then you are beautiful in a way, but they really make an emphasis on, like, specific physical appearances, related to her body, which I was a little uncomfortable with.
I agree. And another core feature of Mary that sort of goes hand in hand with her ugliness, at least how it's presented in the book, is her disagreeableness. So this
Mhm.
is more the emotional state of Mary and less of the physical state. Is Mary is an incredibly disagreeable child, and the way it's addressed in the book is interesting. A lot of people kind of talk about Mary's disagreeableness as if it's innate to her and not a product of her mom not being around, her parents not being in her life, not being interested in her, when in fact, it's that she's raised by people who are not her parents, that her
Mhm.
parents aren't involved in her life, that she becomes disagreeable. She becomes unliking of herself and others.
Yeah, she's somebody who is an incredibly lonely child and incredibly neglected. She grows up essentially without love because her servants don't love her. They fear her, because they fear her parents, and those who have power over them. So it's not a surprise that Mary becomes that way. And then she loses her parents, and people still don't really give her any warmth or kindness. They just see that she's disagreeable and give her that attitude back, which I think is just really such a shame. And I felt that way, like, when I was a kid. I was, not necessarily, the most agreeable child. Like, sometimes I was quiet, but I would sometimes throw tantrums, and a lot of it was due to the horrible things that were happening to me at a kind of tender age, and to see that, like, children can act out, but I think a child being like Mary, for example, that's really unusual, and that's something that should be questioned, like, what's happening here? Where did that come from? Children aren't inherently evil or mean, typically. That's something that I think is important, and the fact that it's linked to her physical appearance is a little strange to me. But what I do like that the book does, and I think is like a good example for me and for like, when I was a young girl, but also for children everywhere, is that Mary still kind of retains her fire. Like, she like they actually applaud her disagreeableness at some point in the book. So there's this part in the book about maybe a little over halfway through, after Mary has met Colin, her cousin, who's kind of this, hidden, tragic Victorian ghost of a child. And he's pretty disagreeable himself. He also has been extremely neglected, and has grown up incredibly lonely, much like Mary. And he also throws a lot of tantrums, just like Mary. And at one point in the book, he becomes upset because Mary hasn't come to visit him, and he is incredibly spoiled. If she doesn't do what he wants, he gets really angry. So at some point in the night, he throws this incredible tantrum, where he's just screaming his head off and scaring everybody. And his nurse comes to find Mary to help. Bear in mind that Mary is about 9 years old and Colin is 10, and these are adults who are kind of trying to make them interact with each other. So Mary is, instead of being scared like all the adults, she's actually just pissed off, which I love. So this is what happens. She flew along the corridor, and the nearer she got to the screams, the higher her temper mounted. She felt quite wicked by the time she reached the door. She slapped it open with her hand and ran across the room to the four-posted bed. You stop, she almost shouted. You stop. I hate you. Everybody hates you. I wish everybody would run out of the house and let you scream yourself to death. You will scream yourself to death in a minute, and I wish you would. A nice, sympathetic child could neither have thought nor said such things, but it just happened that the shock of hearing them was the best possible thing for this hysterical boy whom no one had ever dared to restrain or contradict. And then Mary says, if you scream another scream, she said, I'll scream too, and I can scream louder than you, and I'll frighten you. And then Colin stops screaming because she's so fierce. And I love that.
Yeah. What's great about this part of the book, like you said, is Mary not only retains her spunk, but its usefulness is shown.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it needs to be taught out of her or that she needs to change. It's that, what Colin actually needed was a friend who could be his equal and stand up for herself. And I think it's interesting, like you said, as the book progresses, Mary kind of becomes more beautiful, becomes more healthy in the physical sense. And then in the emotional sense, she retains her disagreeableness, her spunk, but learns to adapt it in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, like you said, for you, this book made a really big impact on you as a kid. It sounds like the physical part of it was maybe not as conscious for you at the time, maybe a little bit more internal. So what did you take away from the story about Mary and how she develops and how she grows?
Yeah, I think that, the physical stuff definitely didn't resonate with me, or it didn't resonate consciously with me at first. I think because I also grew up in a society where, unfortunately, like women and girls are valued for their physical beauty the most.
So
I
this was
didn't.
not out of character.
Yeah,
It was just normal.
I didn't even notice it because it was so, especially at the age, like I think at the age of 5, I was, being told that my nose was too flat, or, people were commenting on my body parts already at a really young age. So that wasn't something that I don't know. Unfortunately, I didn't really notice it. But I did notice how I love that they call her Mary, Miss Contrary or something like that, like Contrary Mary. I loved that because I was also pretty contrary as a child. And I've always been pretty opinionated. And I think that, I do think that Mary learns how to be kinder. She learns kindness and sympathy, and she also learns how to like people, and she learns how to be friends with people. But that doesn't mean she um, ever learns to put people ahead of her, which I know that sounds kind of weird, but I love that she always kind of puts herself first and um, doesn't sacrifice what she wants, and she also stands up for herself, as you said. And I feel like that's something that I think that's a natural part of my personality that was sort of squashed. Like I've always been somebody who was really vibrant. I have a really loud personality. And I think I was also really fun and charming and imaginative as a child. But I think because of the things that I went through, a lot of that was sort of dampened, and I felt like I was living my life in grayscale for a long time. While still kind of, like in classes where I was allowed to shine and where teachers praised me for my intellect, I was more vocal. I was usually the first person to raise my hand. I was regular Hermione Granger, to be honest. And that continued in college. And I noticed that, like, I was usually one of the only people who was a girl or a woman to raise my hand ever in class versus, my male colleagues. And I feel like a lot of that comes from the books that I've read. And The Secret Garden was definitely one of the first ones.
I like how we see Mary's process with her emotions when this happens. At first, when she finds out that Colin is throwing this massive tantrum because she hasn't visited him, she's just so angry.
Mm-hmm.
Really no consideration for him. I mean, she doesn't like that anyone else could interfere with what she wants to do, that she wanted to spend her day out in the garden with Dickon. And we see her through this process of confronting Colin. She slowly begins to like understand where he's coming from and have some empathy for him. And she doesn't change herself.
No, she
but
doesn't
she
feel
becomes
guilty.
more understanding of
Yeah.
his position and begins to kind of incorporate and involve him more to the extent that she can.
Yeah, and she also kind of cuts to the chase and says basically like, "What are you actually crying about?" And he talks about like this lump that he felt on his back, which was actually just a rib because he's so thin. But he is convinced that it means he's going to be a hunchback. And she's the one who actually like makes him lift up his shirt, and she like feels it herself. And she's just the one who like kind of cut through the bullshit. And I think that, and like you said, she doesn't feel guilty for her actions because she wanted to go into a garden. She didn't want to see Colin that day. She wanted to like do something else and then see Colin later. I like that. I like that she did what she wanted, and still also exhibited care for somebody that mattered to her.
I like it too. And when I compare it to my process as a recovering people pleaser, it's pretty different.
Yeah.
My process, if someone in my life were throwing the most absolute miserable tantrum, would be to do whatever they needed
Yeah.
to to just be there, do what I think they might need to make them better when like they said, what Colin needed wasn't that. Colin needed someone who was going to stand up for herself. And um yeah, like I don't it's not always the easiest for me to come from just myself and my own needs and my own feelings when someone is um in distress like that. But usually that's what's needed and what's
Mhm.
actually the most helpful and impactful rather than bending into different versions of ourselves based on how someone else is reacting.
Yeah. I think I really struggled with this kind of being pulled between two approaches because I think naturally I probably do behave more like Mary. Like I think I've always been like that. But unnaturally, just given the circumstances I lived under, I had to adapt and create coping mechanisms or come up with coping mechanisms that would keep me safe, that really conflict with that part of my personality. And now that I've healed a lot, I think I've become more and more, I'm in my Mary era. Like I just feel, I feel like a little, not contrary, but like not necessarily understanding that shame and guilt are like, they're not as useful as I like, to the extent that I used to employ them in my own body and how much they took me over. Caring is useful, and also caring for yourself is part of that. And I think Mary is a great example of that, and I'm really glad the author kept her that way and like didn't really like she becomes a more agreeable child, but she doesn't really lose herself. She doesn't become a different person.
I'm glad the book is written this way too. And let's acknowledge that this is a different world than the one we live in. This was written in 1911 in Britain, and you know, this child is allowed to just be a child. She's allowed to retain her childlike instincts, and um, the men in this book are allowed to be sensitive and curious. And this countryside Britain landscape is a lot less industrial and capitalist than the society you and I grew up in, where
Hmm.
our childlike instincts and natural inclinations aren't as encouraged, where we can just go out and play in the garden all day long.
Yeah. I think that's really it's interesting to think of it, yeah, as a historical era sort of like lens that these children and these men are growing up in a different type of society with different social customs. I mean, obviously they are limited in many ways. Like we're not going to say that like I definitely feel like we've progressed more and I wouldn't want to live in the 1910s. But, as an Asian woman, but I think that there's something very appealing about Mary being allowed to have some fire as a child, as a girl, and then the men being allowed to be quite emotional and soft in this book, and that's a good thing, and that's represented in a positive light. But I also want to talk about how Mary becomes this way, and I think this is a really big theme in the book, and you see it in multiple characters. I want to talk about Mary first, though, just about her loneliness and the longing she has for love and for company and for care. And I personally related to that so much as a child, and I've told Peter many times that I feel like Mary and Mary feels like me. So I want to read two quotes in particular that really stuck with me. So this is the first one where Mary has just lost her parents and she's moving from India to Britain. Since she had been living in other people's houses and had had no ayah, she had begun to feel lonely and to think queer thoughts, which were new to her. She had begun to wonder why she had never seemed to belong to anyone, even when her father and mother had been alive. Other children seemed to belong to their fathers and mothers, but she had never seemed to be really anyone's little girl. She'd had servants and food and clothes, but no one had taken any notice of her. She did not know then that this was because she was a disagreeable child. But then, of course, she did not know she was disagreeable. She often thought other people were, but she did not know that herself. And then later on in the book, when she is at Misselthwaite Manor and she's talking to her maid, Martha, who treats her more like a little sister than as somebody who she's a servant to. Martha is telling Mary about her family and about Dickon, and Mary is very excited to hear about Dickon and how lovely he seems. And so she says to Martha, "I like Dickon," added Mary, "and I've never even seen him." "Well," said Martha stoutly, "I've told thee that the very birds like him, and the rabbits and wild sheep and ponies and the foxes themselves. I wonder," staring at her reflexively, "what Dickon would think of thee." "He wouldn't like me," said Mary in her stiff, cold little way. "No one does." Martha looked reflective again. "How does thou like themselves?" she inquired, really quite as if she was curious to know. Mary hesitated a moment and thought it over. "Not at all, really," she answered, "but I never thought of that before." And so those are both like, and also excuse me trying to read the Yorkshire accent. It's quite hard for me. That's Martha's accent. But yeah, those quotes just kind of break my heart. Like, this child was neglected from basically her birth. And I think as a consequence, turned against herself. She doesn't like herself, and also turned against the world, doesn't like the world. And I think that's just a direct product of how lonely she was.
This is a severe form of neglect by her parents who
Mm-hmm.
really are not involved in her life at all. In some ways, you and I can relate, though, with the loneliness of being a child. Me in particular, as an only child, yeah, often just like spending a lot of time alone, it could feel lonely. What about you, Pauline?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, when we were like preparing for this book and talking about it, I mentioned to you that I used to, I do have siblings, but I was also a really lonely child. I'm the only girl in my family. Even my cousins are boys. And I spent a lot of time like in closets with a flashlight reading books like The Secret Garden, and kind of making a world of my own, like like making a reading nook for myself, and pretending it was a magical world because I felt so lonely. And whenever I was outside of that magical world, I feel like I also became like this stiff and cold child. I didn't know how to talk to people, and it was because I was so afraid of everything. Like, as I mentioned, I think naturally I probably was a really charismatic child, but it was squashed out of me at a really young age. And I feel that way about Mary. Like, I think that she's not naturally like a person who doesn't like things. I think that she's just somebody who wasn't taught how to like herself. She wasn't taught that she's lovable.
It's a really good point. We need adults to help show us that.
Yeah. Because otherwise, like, if you teach your child that they're not worth visiting or being cared for, they're going to think that they're worthless. So yeah, I don't know, Peter, is that something that resonates with you at all? Anything that comes to mind for you?
I was hearing your story, being in the closet with a flashlight reading books. I thought of my imaginary friend George.
You had an imaginary friend.
I don't actually remember this, but my parents or my mom likes to tell me about it.
Aw,
I
George.
would go to my preschool, and she would ask me what I did that day, and I would say, "Talking George."
Oh.
So yeah, clearly there was just this part of me that I was like creating
Yeah.
imaginary friends, people to talk to, and it's interesting hearing you reflect on how you were really scared of people. I think as a kid I was very talkative. I talked to lots of people, and still kind of felt lonely at times,
Mhm.
and that's kind of my experience now. Loneliness is a really big and common feeling for me, and it can occur when I'm alone or when I'm with others.
Oh, yeah.
I can feel lonely in a room full of people, and I think that's so normal. And even when it's with, a really close group of friends or with a really close friend, and there's still moments of feeling alone when there's some parts of ourselves that only we truly know and
Yeah.
only we can truly tend to. And I mean, that's at least been part of both of our experiences.
For sure. And I think that's something that's also maybe unique to us, but I'm sure a lot of people feel this way when we get in that space of like, I'm lonely, even though we've worked on so much and done so much for ourselves. I think that I tend to turn against myself a little bit and say, like, there's something wrong with me that I still feel this way. And I think that's an old narrative. That's a core wound right there. Probably someone like Mary will carry that wound with her for the rest of her life. But it's not something that she it's not something that she's feeling constantly throughout the book. And I think it could have gone a really different way if she hadn't found, ways to heal.
Or as you and I were talking about before we started recording, we may avoid feeling how painful it is to feel lonely by finding things to distract ourselves with,
Yeah.
finding things to do, things to get done, ways to be productive, whatever it might
Or
be.
even ways to hurt ourselves.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever it can to not feel so alone, because
Yeah.
that's the most deep-seated human fear, is the fear of being alone as a human. And we're never truly alone. It's very unlikely we're ever going to find ourselves in a situation where we are truly alone, but it can sure feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
We discussed Mary and her experience of loneliness and longing, and perhaps an even more severe case, dare we say,
Oh, yeah.
of severe neglect, loneliness is Colin. Colin is Mr. Craven, the master of Misselthwaite Manor's son, Mary's cousin. Colin is hidden off in a room of this giant manor,
Yeah, he's in, like, a secret corridor.
a secret corridor. Mary doesn't even know he exists. All the servants are required to be hush-hush about him, not tell Mary that he exists. But Mary keeps hearing cries during the night, and what is going on? And she can tell that the servants are not disclosing the full truth to her. And finally, Mary takes it upon herself to go and just explore for herself and find the noise as she's feeling more courageous and, um, yeah, like just more comfortable. And she meets Colin, who we find out is the son of Mr. Craven, who for his entire life has been hidden away. Mr. Craven can't even bring himself to visit him. I have this quote. And again, the Yorkshire accent.
We're doing our
gonna
best.
try our best here. Everybody has knowed about Mr. Craven, knowed there was a little lad as was like to be a cripple, and they knowed Mr. Craven didn't like him to be talked about. Folks is sorry for Mr. Craven because Mrs. Craven was such a pretty young lady and they was so fond of each other. Mrs. Medlock stops in our cottage whenever she goes to the manor, and she doesn't mind talking to mother before us children because she knows us has been brought up to be trusty. How did thou find out about him? Martha was in fine trouble the last time she came home. She said thou had heard him frettin' and thou was asking questions, and she didn't know what to say. The conversation goes on as Mary starts to inquire. This is from Ben Weatherstaff, one of the gardeners, a bit more about Colin. And Ben Weatherstaff has this to say about Mr. Craven's perspective on his son Colin. Mary asks, "Do you think he wants him to die?" Ben says, "No, but he wishes he'd never been born. Mother, she says that's the worst thing on earth for a child. Them as is not wanted scarce ever thrives. Master Craven, he'd buy anything as money could buy for the poor lad, but he'd like to forget that he's on earth. For one thing, he's afraid he'll look at him someday and find he's growed a hunchback." And I think I'm wrong. I think this was Martha, not Ben Weatherstaff, who was actually
I
having
think
this
it
conversation
was
with
Dickon,
Mary.
actually.
Oh, was it Dickon?
Yeah, it's Dickon.
So I was wrong on many fronts, but thanks for the correction. And how devastating.
Yeah. At least, I mean, his situation parallels Mary's very interestingly because a lot of people didn't know that they existed as children. But at least Mary, like, was able to look at her mom, and Mary was able to, like, go outside. Colin is basically trapped in this corridor, like this hidden passageway. He's just trapped in this room because he's so afraid of going outside. And he's afraid that he's going to get sick because people keep talking about how his father has this, you know, I suppose a deformity. I'm not really sure what a hunchback is. And that they think that he will also develop it, like maybe he has like scoliosis or something. And I think that it's also like so ableist to think that, like to think that that would make him, I don't know, like something to be feared. And they talk about him dying all the time, like in front of him. So Colin is just kind of really forgotten by the one person who's supposed to love him, his father. And not loved and barely cared for, to be honest, by his quote unquote caretakers.
It's not just that Mr. Craven fears his son Colin developing a hunchback. It's that Colin, particularly Colin's eyes, remind him of his dead wife, who died while Colin was young.
Yeah, I think that it's particularly sad when later we hear or we see from Mr. Craven's perspective that Colin has the exact eyes of his mother, and so Mr. Craven will only see Colin when he's sleeping because he can't bear to see his wife's eyes because he's so heartbroken. And that's so sad because like even if he is seeing his son and he does show some like attachment to him, maybe not love, but attachment to him, Colin doesn't know that his father is coming to see him because he just can't look at his eyes.
It's a deep loneliness and longing that Colin has, of course, internalized. Colin's life is kind of misery. He throws terrible tantrums all the time. He is just uncomfortable.
Yeah, and he manifests
Yes.
his own physical ailments sometimes too.
Yes. He's heard from the adults around him so often that there's this fear that he's sick, that there's something wrong with him. He's kind of started to believe that he's sick.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit of like hypochondriac tendencies. I can kind of relate with this where like I will get myself so worked up over the idea that I could be unwell or that I could get sick that I will make myself sick with stress. It's real. Our physical bodies and our emotional, mental states, what our brains think about ourselves are inherently intertwined.
Yeah, our brains are really powerful. I don't think people recognize that. Like obviously, yes, our bodies can be out of sync with our brains and like, Mr. Craven growing some sort of like, growing um crookedly in his back is his body. He couldn't like necessarily manifest a straight back with his mind. But that doesn't mean that Colin can't manifest sickness for himself because he himself is thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And he refuses to get out of bed. He's so scared of being outside. So he stays in this like dark room, like with the windows closed, and barely moves. And so he makes himself sick.
As you said earlier, I'm not sure if it made it into the recording. Mary is your favorite character, but Dickon is your certified second favorite character and a close second. What did you think, or do you remember what you thought the first time when Mary meets Colin? Because he's
Mm.
presented quite differently than how Dickens presented.
Yeah, I think this is like maybe my little girl bias. I didn't really like Colin when I first read this. And even when he got well, I was like, whatever, I don't really care about you. I like Dickon. Because I was a 6-year-old girl who was like imposing myself into Mary's consciousness and like having a crush on Dickon. Um, but seeing Colin now, I just feel like and like incredible pity for him. He's just like this wretched little creature. Like it's so sad. It's so upsetting because I think otherwise he would be a really um fun, hearty child. And he does exhibit some kindness later. But I think that it's really such a shame that he's he's made to, he like that adults treat him like he's almost like an object and they don't realize that he can hear them when they talk about him in front of him, which is very, very much like of the time. But even now, I think that people don't see like children as intelligent human beings who are absorbing.
They are. They're
Um,
sponges. They
yeah,
absorb what they hear.
yeah, it's like that song from Into the Woods, Children Will Listen. Like, you have to be careful with what you say around children because, like, even if they don't show that they're listening, they can hear you.
And they
And
can read body language.
yeah, they can absorb a lot of information. And I think that even now we don't completely understand. There's so much more to learn about how a child develops and like how they absorb information and integrate that into their body. And it's very clear to me that Colin is integrating a ton of negative energy around him and that nobody's giving him kindness or care or love. And the closest thing to that he receives is from one of the doctors that he encounters that says like he just needs fresh air and for people to stop coddling him, which isn't exactly love. It is a type of care because it's true, but it's not kindness or love, and that's really what Colin needs.
Thank God Mary and Dickon take a liking to him and involve him in their garden adventures. And thankfully, Colin's ending is pretty happy. He improves tremendously. He becomes less sickly every day. And at the end of the book, we have this beautiful reunion between Colin and his father, Mr. Craven. And
Yeah.
Mr. Craven himself is certainly not immune to feeling lonely and deep longing as he's lost his true love in life in a tragic accident, which spawns kind of the core feature of this book, The Secret Garden.
Yeah, I can't believe we haven't even talked about that yet.
Right. Mrs. Craven
Mhm.
is sitting on a tree branch in her favorite part of these great gardens on the Craven estate, and the branch falls and she dies.
It's so
And
tragic.
Mr. Craven's response is to literally lock that away.
Yeah.
He closes the door to that part of the garden and buries the key. The walls and doors are covered with ivy that no one can ever find that part of the garden again, except for Ben Weatherstaff, this gardener who, before he started developing arthritis, had climbed over the wall and been actually taking care of the garden for some time. And now we get Mary, who, as soon as she hears that there's a secret part of the garden, wants everything to do with it. And she finds the key with the help of a friend who's a robin.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about the impact of animals in this book. And this is where Mary really comes to life, is in this secret garden. She begins tending to the plants. This is where Dickon comes and they develop this beautiful bond with each other. And this is where they bring Colin and where Colin heals.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, Mr. Craven, like we said, has been so lonely and longing. And he comes back from this long vacation away where he's been touring around Europe. And um, I think it's really beautiful. Like at the same time that Colin kind of enters the garden and begins coming to life, Mr. Craven, while he's away, starts to become attached to the natural environment that he's in,
Mhm.
and it ends with this beautiful reunion where the two
Yeah.
hug and Colin's able to walk and run into Mr. Craven's arms where he hasn't been able to walk and run before.
Yeah, but I think it's important to say that it's a slow process for Mr. Craven. I think, like, the children are more imaginative and more resilient and also maybe just haven't though they've gone through a lot, they're not cognizant of what they've gone through versus Mr. Craven, who was very loved and loved very much his wife, and to have lost that was
Mhm.
incredibly, was such an incredible blow to him that, like, he just doesn't recover from it for 10 years, and is completely, shut off from the world and can't really bear to live in his reality, a reality that doesn't include a living wife or his living wife. And something that you and I have talked about before is how, he's in Austria and he's looking at a stream with these beautiful flowers, and the book talks about his negative thoughts, basically, and how him thinking about the flowers being beautiful was the first nice thought that he had basically in those 10 years. And then, that kind of that, but he can't just like follow that thread of goodness. It's really hard for him. It has to come in stages for him.
Tragedy always changes people. Tragedy unaddressed is so destructive.
Hmm.
Um, he's so devastated that he can't even be a father to his son Colin, who is, uh, what he really has left in life of his wife. It's self-destructive and it's so devastating.
Yeah, it's self-destructive, and like you said, it it like the impact lands outside of him. Like he if he, like, continued on this path, he kind of I mean, he not necessarily wouldn't have, like he might not have ruined Colin's life, but, like, if we look at it from outside the book, like this book of magic, realistically, yeah, he could have ruined Colin's life, and that's the effect of him not really addressing his own feelings and sort of shutting himself off from the world.
I experienced a really major tragedy as a young adult when my very good friend from high school died in a tragic way. And had I not had the support and help I did and the ability to surround myself with other people who knew him and people who could help inform me about the nature of death and of life and of tragedy and could allow me to experience the fullness of my feelings, I don't know
Mhm.
how I would have done. it's still an event and a person whom I think about all the time. He's in my thoughts often. And for Mr. Craven, who um, lost not only a friend but a lover, I mean his partner in life,
His best friend.
and to be alone in this 100-room manor, I can't even imagine the devastation.
Yeah, and I think it's very, I think it's tempting to dislike Mr. Craven. I certainly didn't think much of him when I was a child reading this book. Um, but as an adult now, I see how I didn't have a child who I neglected for 10 years, sure. But I went through some pretty tough stuff that I carried with me for my life, my whole life, and I didn't address it until later in my 20s. I just sort of tried to run from it, and as a result, I hurt a lot of people, and I did do damage. Um, and I think that that's something that you can't really take back. Like, yeah, Colin learns to walk and, like, learns to play and learns how to be a kid and learns how to be happy. But I think that, there might be a happy ending for now in that book, but I think if we continue to look into the future, Colin things would manifest for Colin, the things that, his father had left him for essentially the first 10 years of his life. Um, that will come out somehow unless Colin himself addresses it. And that's something that stays with me that, like, maybe I haven't abused a child in their formative years, but that the harm that I've done, it happened and I can't take it back. And I think that's a real side effect of depression and hurt.
I feel both angry and empathetic towards Mr. Craven. And I think it's the same way we relate with, like you said, the harms we've caused ourselves and the people we've abandoned. And um, we feel guilty, we feel angry, and we feel understanding. We feel,
Yeah.
um, we know that if things could have gone differently, they would have.
Yeah. And that also what's important is, maybe we can forgive ourselves someday in stages or not. Like, I don't know how much that matters. I feel like the forgiveness comes in stages for me at least. But what's important is that we do better. Like, I think that Mr. Craven, towards the end of the book, he sort of murmurs to himself, like, I hope I'm not too late. What if I'm too late? But he runs anyway. He runs back to his home and tries to find Colin and sort of like makes a plan for how to be a father because he wants to do better. So we've talked about the effects of loneliness, and also we have alluded to the happy ending that all these characters get. But I want to talk about specifically what brings them there and how they all individually come back to life, sort of. And the first thing that I think is really important to cover is that the children learn how to play.
There's a quote that I think is so playful and shows how playful Mary becomes. There's in the garden a robin who has befriended both the gardener Ben Weatherstaff and now Mary. And Mary goes out into the garden and she sees the robin and she says, "Oh," she cried out, "is it you? Is it you?" And it did not seem at all queer to her that she spoke to him as if she was sure that he would understand and answer her. He did answer. He twittered and chirped and hopped along the wall as if he were telling her all sorts of things. It seemed to Mistress Mary as if she understood him, too, though he was not speaking in words. It was if he said, "Good morning. Isn't the wind nice? Isn't the sun nice? Isn't everything nice? Let us both chirp and hop and twitter. Come on, come on." Mary began to laugh, and as he hopped and took little flights along the wall, she ran after him. Poor little thin, sallow, ugly Mary. She actually looked almost pretty for a moment.
Okay, well, let's ignore that last sentence. Other than that, I thought like that's just like so sweet that like Mary exhibits like childlikeness again, that she's hopping and skipping and having fun with this bird that she's befriended.
It says she chirped and tried to whistle, which last she did not know how to do in the least. So she's just trying her very best to literally learn how to play. She hasn't learned how to play before.
Yeah, no one's taught her and no one played with her, most importantly. I think it's so sweet because it I mean, the book unfortunately denotes this by saying that she looks almost pretty. But what the book really means and what the spirit of the book means is that she is coming back to life.
She is. There's a lot of ways that the book kind of equates beauty with liveliness. Like they talk
Yeah.
about the redness coming back to Mary's cheeks and she's becoming fatter. She's filling out her frame. Like these
Hmm.
sorts of things that, yes, are about her physical appearance, but are very much about like her spirit and her liveliness too.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, and that's something that I had to learn, um, as I was, like, first, learning how to confront, the traumas that I carried and learning how to, I don't know, process them. Something that's really important in processing trauma is to play. Like, it can't all be doom and gloom and hard work, the whole time. Like, I think the purpose of healing is to enjoy your life.
How do you play, Pauline?
That's still something that I feel like I'm constantly working on, but
Me too.
I feel like I'm known as the person who has, like, 100 hobbies. Like, I take singing lessons, I've been in a play before, like, my first ever play I acted in, I was a part of the main cast, which was really exciting for me, and that happened last year. I think I just, take fun classes, just for fun, not for self-improvement, and, I also think that I, learn how to, I think for a long time I would kind of read serious books and classics, which I still love very much, but also I've learned to read books for joy. And that would include, like, fun rom-coms or romance novels, like things that are lighter and just kind of happier. And I think that's part of a playful spirit for sure. What about you, Peter?
It's funny. I really related to a part you said about just for play, not for self improvement.
Mhm.
I think it's still really hard for me to do playful activities without being really competitive and being really, um, oh, if I'm not good at this, I can't do it.
Mm,
So for me, like I've always played sports growing up and that's been super fun, but it can also really be a gateway to, oh, I'm not doing well enough.
yeah.
I like to play video games. That's something more lately that's been fun. But yeah, like it's interesting noticing how as I get older, it's become really easy for me to replace playful things with productive quote
Yeah,
unquote
that's so
things.
American.
And it really does take like intention and
Mhm. Yeah.
effort to restore elements of play and having fun.
Sometimes I wonder if that's part of why people, have children is so that they can play again. Like, when I was visiting a friend and her young children, and they have a trampoline in their backyard, and their, children, who were, like, 3 and or, like, yeah, 3 and 5 at the time, they got into the trampoline and started bouncing, and they wanted me to come in with them. So I went, and I started jumping, and I didn't see my face, but my friend who was, like, supervising us, she looked at me and she was like, "Wow, Pauline, there was just, like, this amazing look of joy. I wish you could have seen it, like, on your face." And I think that's really important, to keep in your life, like, this sense of joy and wonder, and play for play's sake, enjoying your life just to enjoy it.
I'm thinking about a few of the times we've gotten together with our mutual friends, whether it's playing board games or being outside and playing games, and just some really funny memories and some really
Yeah.
fun times.
Yeah, I think I remember one time we did a picnic and somebody brought bubbles. Like, I just think it's so sweet, and I think that's a really I think that there's a pressure that comes with adulthood, and we forget how to play, and we also feel like we don't have time to play, and I think it's a really important part of, what keeps us going and what keeps us engaged with our lives. And I do wanna talk about one instance of Colin playing. I think it's so sweet. He starts, thinking about magic, and let's just, imagine he's a 10-year-old boy, and he starts talking about, what magic is and that he wants to experiment with it. Do you have a quote, Peter?
Of course, there must be lots of magic in the world, he said wisely one day, but people don't know what it is like or how to make it. Perhaps the beginning is just to say nice things are going to happen until you make them happen. I am going to try and experiment. And so Colin has, yeah, taken it upon himself to introduce their little ragtag bunch to magic and to become this like experimenter wizard. And he sort of like gets them in a circle and they're chanting and he's saying
Yeah.
that all these nice things are going to happen and he's saying they're going to come true. They're going to come true. And the book actually kind of shows us that they do come true. Like I think
Mhm.
this book believes in magic
Yeah, and
to an
honestly,
extent.
I sort of believe in magic too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, this is not the same thing. It's not, this isn't, I think I believe in a different type of magic now, but when I was in like fifth grade, I remember my friends and I like held these like rocks and like chanted, hoping for wind to come because it was so hot that day. And that's just playing and imagination. But also, I think, I don't remember feeling cooler, but I do think that, now in my adulthood, I do believe like in like, putting energy out there and hoping for goodness to come back to you and reaching for goodness, and generating more, which is also part of why I wanted to do this podcast.
We both like this depiction of magic in the book. It's a bit limited, though. It sort of takes on this air of toxic positivity where there's this quote, and it's right towards the end of the book where it says, "Where you tend a rose, my lad, a thistle cannot grow." And
Yeah.
we want to hesitate, there's real trauma and neglect and just awful tragedy in this book. And the idea that all the characters here are fully restored and fully healthy and happy and positive and are just going to be under the influence of this beautiful magic all their lives, and that because they're tending their roses, thistles won't grow, isn't really true or accurate.
Agreed.
It's lovely for a story, but maybe not super helpful.
Yeah, I think it's really reductive. And I mean that it reflects the time in which this was written, but also I think this is kind of a cultural, I think, wish that like if we just think positively, we don't have to reflect on the past as much. We can just move forward.
Totally.
And that's just not how healing works. Healing is cyclical, and not linear. And I think that, a rose and a thistle can coexist, and that is still a meaningful and joyful life.
We also want to talk about the healing impact that nature and animals have in this book. It's pretty clear early on that the first connections Mary really makes are with animals. She grows an attachment to this robin, and then your favorite character, Pauline, our second favorite character after Mary, Dickon, is like this wood
Oh my
nymph-like
God.
creature
He's
who
like a little girl's
charms
dream.
charms all these animals and walks around with a fox following him and a crow on his
And like
shoulder.
a squirrels in his pockets. Like, ugh.
And yeah, well, what does that mean to you? Why were you so attracted to Dickon? And what?
Don't make me sound so creepy, Peter.
No, it's I want to know like
Yeah.
what's special about, in particular, like the connection to nature and
Hmm.
to animals and yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes it feels like the world that we live in, the human world, feels really harsh, and unkind. And I think that that's reflected in this book, that like basically every human that Mary interacts with is unkind to her. Even Martha, her maid, she's not unkind, but she's not necessarily, she's just kind of oblivious, and she does kind of say unkind things. Like she does call Mary ugly, and she calls her odd, and calls her, maybe like she implies that she's stupid because she doesn't know how to put on her own clothes, and doesn't really reflect on the fact that Mary was never actually raised by anybody. Um, and, I think Dickon is the first person who really shows her kindness. And he also doesn't really necessarily, he does call her odd, but he doesn't see that as a bad thing. He sees it as like almost like his animals, like it's somebody that, maybe he can't communicate with, but also he can. Like he just will accept them for what they are. And I think that's what's really, I don't know, there's something really lovely about that. Like, and that's why they feel safe around him. Dickon is just somebody who is an incredibly safe person, and for nature and animals like to flourish around him just gives me a warm feeling. And obviously, I'm in my 30s now. I do not have a crush on Dickon, but when I was 6 years old reading this book, I definitely did. And that 6-year-old is still in me, and like loves this idea of a boy who is kind and safe to be around. Like Mary feels immediately safe around him. Um, and I think that it also just shows like Dickon can see life where most people see like nothing, like he sees goodness where maybe like people aren't looking. Like when he first enters the secret garden with Mary, when she trusts him with her secret, he goes around, showing her that there is life everywhere. Even if the parts of the garden look dead, he'll, take a knife and cut open a branch and show that it's a little green inside. And he says that it's wick, which means that it's alive. And that is extremely exciting to Mary. And I think it's really symbolic that Mary herself is alive, even though people don't nourish her. They are not like caring for her. And they also kind of want to forget her. And Dickon is the first person who like really wants to be her friend, and treats her like somebody whose company he wants to be around.
Dickon is almost a bit animal-like himself. He lives out in the valleys and, just kind of like makes his life on the land. And I can reflect in my life like the healing nature of animals and being among them and just having something to love and to love you back.
And something that just accepts you.
Yeah.
Like, we've talked about this before, that it can be hard for us to love simply. It doesn't even have to be an animal. I mean, I think that even just the trees, it feels like, I don't know, like, when I first moved to Boston and I was sort of like Mary, like I just felt like half dead. And there was nobody necessarily looking out for me because I didn't really have friends here. I would go for a walk in the same nature reserve every week. And it was, I moved here in the fall where everything was dying, and, the winter comes on pretty fast in Boston. So everything was really bleak looking for a while. And I was bleak just internally. But every week I would go, and eventually, every week I would notice spring coming on kind of slowly. It comes on really slowly in Boston, just like it does in this book. And there's something very special about that, like to see the world waking up. You can't help but feel connected to that world and realize that you yourself are waking up. And I think that's what happens to Mary. And I don't know, the more I read this book, like it was meaningful to me as a child, but definitely now that I have a stronger connection with nature, like whenever I don't feel well, I connect with nature because it makes me understand and remember that I'm part of something bigger.
And it's like a very basic connection to being human, is like putting your feet in the grass or, looking up at the trees and we are nature. Humans are nature. And we forget that sometimes because humans are a really complicated and messy part of nature. But the complicated and messy parts of nature are really beautiful too.
Yeah, it's nice to feel part of something that is bigger and to realize that, maybe you don't matter that much and also you're part of this huge thing, which I think is lovely. So, what I think I want to end on is ultimately what really has healed me, and I think heals Mary and shows, like a more she becomes a more complex person, but ultimately a happier person, is that she grows up. Part of it is maturing, but not losing touch with her childlikeness, like her inner child. I mean, she is still a child in the book, but I think that applies to us humans, like as a whole, like that we can retain a connection with our inner child while still growing up. And that's an important part of, having a meaningful life and enjoying your life and having meaningful relationships. So something that I thought was really lovely was that Mary, is playing in the garden. She's having a lot of fun as a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old. And then she like gets in this fight with Colin because, she didn't go to see him. She went to the garden instead. And he's really mad at her for that. And she, like, I love that her childlikeness, like, motivated her to go and play instead. And then I also like that she does display some like level of growth and understanding in this passage that I'll read right now. So Mary has just received a gift, that are like, a lovely gift of books, and she's still kind of mad at Colin. If she had been friends with Colin, she would have run to show him her presents at once, and they would have looked at the pictures and read some of the gardening books and perhaps tried to playing the games, and he would have enjoyed himself so much he would never have thought he was going to die or have put his hand on his spine to see if there was a lump coming. He had a way of doing that which she could not bear. It gave her an uncomfortable, frightened feeling because he always looked so frightened himself. He said that if he felt even quite a little lump, someday he should know his hunch had begun to grow. Something he had heard Mrs. Medlock whispering to the nurse um, had given him the idea, and he had thought over it in secret until it was quite firmly fixed in his mind. Mrs. Medlock had said his father's back had begun to show its crookedness in the way when he was a child. He'd never told anyone but Mary that most of his tantrums, as they called them, grew out of his hysterical hidden fear. Mary had been very sorry for him when he told her. He always began to think about it when he was cross or tired, she said to herself, and he has been cross today. Perhaps he has been thinking about it all afternoon. She stood still, looking down at the carpet and thinking. I said I would never go back again, she hesitated, knitting her brows. But perhaps, just perhaps, I will go and see if he wants me in the morning. Perhaps he'll try to throw his pillow at me again, but I think I'll go.
It's such a meaningful passage, and it's exactly what you said. So much maturity and growth, but still being a child and still
Yeah.
at the same breath as she's saying, she has this newfound understanding of Colin's position that he should just come out and play and be in the garden, and that will bring him back to life. And
Yeah.
I think this presentation of growth and maturity is so contradictory to what society often tells us about growing up, that it's to lose touch with our inner child, to lose sight of our inner child, and to be a kind of straight and narrow adult.
Yeah.
And I will admit I am really influenced by that, especially as a man. I feel like there's a masculine aspect of like to get in touch with the inner child would be just so sensitive and so vulnerable and so not being this kind of rough and tough sort of man. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard sometimes. I feel that resistance inside me when I know that I need to touch base with my inner child and that I need to connect with that source in order to feel better, in order to
Yeah. In order to
really be
feel
in touch with
in
myself, to
general.
feel it all.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that what comes with the vulnerability of an inner child is something that we forget about this, but what comes with the vulnerability of an inner child is also the sweetness of an inner child. And that's what kind of shows in this passage, that Mary does have sweetness to her. Um, and she accesses it through her childlikeness and her wonderment at the world. Because I think our inner children love living and love being in this world. They love exploring. They're very curious, as any child would be. And I think that's a really important part of um, growing up. As not intuitive as that sounds, is to integrate that part of ourselves.
Absolutely. And when our inner children are neglected, they're still there and they still show up.
Yeah.
We react from a childlike place to the people in our lives. We, um, yeah, have outsized reactions to the things happening in our lives because we're not in touch with a childlike component who's just hurting, who just needs nurturing and attention.
Yeah. I think it's important that that like part of growing up is learning what different parts of you exist, and maybe that they conflict, and knowing that they're all valid. And I think that Mary understands that, and in this passage she sort of like kind of miraculously does it on her own, where she's thinking about many different things and all coalesces into one compassionate conclusion for her cousin, where she's like, well, maybe I will see him, and it's very sweet. Yeah.
Pauline, I know this book meant so much to you and you
Yeah.
really have a fond relationship with this book. And this is actually the first book we've covered that both of us hadn't read before. I'd never read this book until you
Mhm.
and I decided to cover it. But what do you want to close with? And any just personal takeaways from this book, from this story, from Mary?
Yeah. I think that I'm so grateful for this book. It and I'm grateful for not just myself, but for many, many children who love this book. It's much beloved. I think that the protagonist of Mary is such a good example for little girls, that like you can be actually pretty complex even as a child, and that complexity doesn't have to go away. You can be fierce and disagreeable, but also fun and playful, and love animals and jump rope and like learn how to weed gardens on your own. Like you can be a lot of different things, in a little girl body, and that can continue for your whole life. And then also that nature is a healing source. I think that's really important. And I didn't realize how important that was until much later in my life when I really turned to nature and turned to things that were bigger than me to kind of come out of myself a little bit more and to kind of come out of depression. So, yeah, I hope that, people find the same comfort that I did in this book. I love it so much, and I love Mary, and also Dickon is my dream boy.
I thought you said as a 30-something-year-old woman, you no longer have a crush on Dickon.
But the inner child Peter.
I think for me with this book, I think I surprised you a little bit before we started recording when I told you Ben Weatherstaff was my favorite character. Ben is the gardener on the estate, and he's this kind of curmudgeonly old man who over time really opens up, and he plays with them. He goes into the secret garden and sits in their magic circle and
he chants
and he
too.
chants
Yeah.
and Colin says, "Is your arthritis getting better?" And he says, it is. And I think it's for me just the play, the natural elements, the animals. It's just an invitation and an encouragement to be in touch with the more sensitive, natural, childlike parts of myself.
Yeah, that exists within us. You can find Book Feels wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Instagram at BookFeelsPodcast or email us at bookfeelspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.